All right, so the Buffalo Sabres have fired Don Granato. That news happened about 20 minutes ago from when I am recording this video. They played their last game last night. They get back to Western New York. Then they make the decision to fire Don Granato. Kevin Adams will speak later today. He put out a statement. It says exactly what you would expect it to say. He thanks Don Granato for his time. He played a role in things, blah, blah, blah. I'm surprised that this happened, but I'm not shocked. Like with other moves, I've been, wow, I did not see that coming. I didn't think that this was going to happen. I did not think that they were going to actually fire Don Granato, and that honestly has nothing to do with whether or not that's the right decision. I think this is the right decision. I'm surprised because I didn't think the Sabres were going to do this again. I didn't think that they had it in them to make a decision based off of the results on the ice and try and just basically start over. Now, the core that is being inherited by whoever this next coach is not bad. Like, conceivably, this shouldn't be something that takes forever to try and rebuild. But at the same time, a lot of these players that are going to return are part of the reason why Don Granato is getting fired. Once again, I think that this is the right move for the Sabres. But Don Granato is not the reason why most of these guys completely failed to meet their expectations this season. Like, there are reasons that he had that made the Sabres struggle this year, but that's not to say that it's all on him. He's not the reason Dylan Cousins' goal production basically cut in half. The same thing with Tage Thompson, with Alex Tuck. He's not the reason why Jack Quinn got injured before the season even started, and then the team didn't even bother trying to go find a replacement. They just thought to themselves, okay, we're going to bank on somebody internally stepping up. Like, there's a lot of things that happened that are not Don Granato's fault, but ultimately somebody kind of needs to fall on the sword, and in this instance, it's going to be him. So we will hear from Kevin Adams later today. I think that's another interesting part to this, too. Kevin Adams talking on this later today pretty much tells us that Kevin Adams is not going anywhere, so the big move will be that Don Granato is out, and the Sabres will have their first coaching search essentially since Ralph Kruger, because Don Granato, had the interim tag removed after he was an assistant with Ralph Kruger, so I don't really remember if that was a full-on search or if it was just kind of implied that Don Granato would get the job and then they took the interim tag off. So here are going to be the names that everybody's going to talk about for the next several weeks. Lindy Ruff, Michael Peca, Seth Appert, Craig Berube. The name I just tweeted, which is a complete long shot, but I would think it would be a fantastic idea, is Rod Brind'Amour. There's a connection with Kevin Adams. The two of them won a cup together in Carolina. That was the 05-06 season against the Sabres. I do not believe he is under contract moving forward. He is going to get a huge payday, probably from the Carolina Hurricanes. But, I think back to that press conference from Terry Pegula, like, our sole existence is to try and win the Stanley Cup. He was very aggressive trying to get Mike Babcock here. That did not work out. I think that they will be willing to pay somebody. Now it's just a question of, are they willing to pay somebody enough to get them away from a team that has become a legitimate Stanley Cup contender? I don't think that that's likely. Then we go to the guys who have already been here. Lindy Ruff is the big one. With Terry Pegula calling the shots, I would not be surprised if Lindy Ruff is the coach of the Buffalo Sabres next season. Now, once again, I do not agree with that. I do not think that this team needs another guy who has just been around the block and who failed to meet expectations this year in New Jersey. I know that, once again, there were a lot of other reasons why that didn't work. They had atrocious goaltending, and that's one of the reasons why they failed to meet expectations in New Jersey. But I'm always of the belief that you got to try something new. You got to try something fresh. I don't like going back into the well and trying to just do the same thing over and over again. I don't think it would be a horrible idea, but I think that there are better ones out there. Craig Berube is another name that you are going to hear people talk about because he won a Stanley Cup. He had success, and then he got fired. Would this team look different with Craig Berube as their coach? Absolutely. They would play a much different brand of hockey. I just don't know if that's what they're going for. It's, once again, kind of like not comparing them because they're very different coaching styles, but Dan Bylsma didn't work here. Dan Bylsma won Stanley Cups and then got here and was fired within a couple of years. Would Craig Berube work here, or is it just going to be the same thing over again? And then there's the other options of Seth Appert, right? Like, Seth Appert has led the Amherst to success. Would that translate here in Buffalo? I don't know. I feel like his next step up should be an assistant coach in the NHL before he becomes a full-time coach in the NHL. And then you'll hear people talk about Mike Pekka. You'll hear people talk about Jay McKee, other Sabres coaches who are now coaching around the league. Mike Weber, throw him into the mix too. Like, I understand why these guys will be talked about, but at the same time, I just think that that's sometimes low-hanging fruit. So now the Sabres begin a coaching search, and they need to find somebody to end the longest drought in the NHL, 13 seasons. A lot of this will fall on them. A lot of it ultimately fell on Don Granato. He wasn't able to get it done. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I do not think it's all on him. I think there's a lot of reasons why this team failed to meet expectations this season. But at the end of the day, something needed to be done. They needed to make a change because this season was a failure on so many accounts. There are people who are just no longer caring, which is the worst thing that could happen. When people are mad, at least they still care. When people stop caring, that's when you have a real problem. And at the end of the season, it was pretty apparent. Like, you just go into that building, it was half empty, people weren't into it, people stopped just believing in the team. They stopped believing in the rebuild. And there was a stat from Matt Fairburn at The Athletic that just keeps on coming and back into the back of my head this morning, that they had multiple chances to get within 4 points of a playoff spot this season. I think it was 6 times. And in every single one of those games, they lost. Like, that is just inexcusable. I think that is partially on coaching. I think the power play stinking is partially on coaching. And then I think that, those slow starts that they had, sure, that's on the players, but why was it like every night you felt like you were playing from behind? I don't know the answer to that. That's what the Sabres now need to figure out. A coaching search begins. Don Granato has been fired. You got a lot to talk about now over the next couple weeks. I would imagine that this takes several weeks, unless they just call Lindy Ruff back. But we'll see what happens. Thanks, guys. We'll talk soon.